Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Teaching Tax Flow podcast, episode 118 today. We are going to look at cannabis and taxes, what it means for the industry, hopefully take some of the confusion or interest that you have and make some sense of it here with a great guest we have coming up. But before we do that, let's take a brief moment and thank our episode sponsor.
This podcast is sponsored by Reps Tracker. Are you a real estate investor who is bogged down with the huge tax burden? Real estate investing can open the door to powerful tax benefits. Reps Tracker can streamline the process of accelerating these opportunities. To take advantage of a special TTF community discount, go to teachingtaxflow.com/reps, R-E-P-S, and use the code IFG. Better yet, click on the link below in this episode's show notes to go directly to the Reps Tracker sign-up page.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Teaching Tax Flow podcast. As you heard in the intro or read in the show description, today we're going to talk about something pretty unique that you may not have expected from us. So obviously, we're going to dive into the world of cannabis, not the details of the industry specifically, but how it relates to taxes. So if it's something that you haven't thought about, whether you're in the industry, thinking about going into the industry, you're thinking about investing in the industry, you're a user, you're not a user, etc. Just even based off any interests, this is a good one to listen to because you might start to connect some dots, if we will, just how some specific industries do pose some challenges and opportunities when it comes to taxes. So as always, we brought not only this guy that if you're watching, you can see, but we brought on a great guest, which I'll let introduce here shortly. But Chris, as I always say, welcome back to your own show, sir. How's it going?
Thanks, John. Oh, geez, it's so great to see you again, John.
Oh, I know that. I am unblushing again. Here I am unblushing.
I know. No, it's great to be back. I'm excited about this topic. This is a topic you might think to yourself, well, cannabis industry, that's not a, well, how many people does that affect? Ultimately, it affects anyone that operates or works in that industry. So we're going to talk about owners of businesses in that industry. We're going to talk about employees of in that industry. We're also going to talk about vendors. So what happens if you own a piece of property and you rent it out to someone in the cannabis industry? Is there a play role? And then talk through this on a federal level. We know that each state's a little bit different, but we could touch on that. We have an amazing guest, so I'm going to be quiet. Bringing in Kareyna Miller, a CPA based out of Michigan, and we've met many years ago through the Michigan Association of CPAs. She, in my opinion, is the authority on cannabis industry tax and actually accounting, attestation, which we'll touch on a little bit. Kareyna, welcome to the Teaching Tax Flow podcast.
Thank you, Chris. I'm excited to be here.
Can you tell us about yourself and what led you to become a CPA and then ultimately niche into this industry?
Sure. So I started in the cannabis industry in late 2016. So it's been a little while now. I got my CPA license 2011, so 5 years earlier. It was a college. I had a professor who, it was between finance and accounting, and their encouragement was to go into the accounting field. So that's what I did, and then got my start with a regional firm here. Was there for enough time to get my CPA and to see how things worked, and then I ended up going into private industry, and then into cannabis after that.
Well, awesome. And tell us about the type of clients you typically work with, both on maybe a tax compliance side, but also a little bit about, accounting, attestation. I know I'm using the term attestation. Many of you don't, you're kind of looking at your phone or your computer or whatever right now saying, what is attestation? But Kareyna could break that down in a little simpler terms.
Sure. So two sides to it. So there's, I have my core client group who I like to call them managed advisory services. It's overseeing their accounting, their tax advisory, their tax preparation, kind of everything that they need. I work with small businesses, mostly based in Michigan, primarily growers and processors, and then a few retailers as well. The attestation side is different. So attestation, the CPA has to be independent. The way I explain that to a client is they don't do anything with your books. They're not, helping you with the details of your tax planning, your advisory. They're somebody probably that you've never met or know, haven't worked with, somebody completely unbiased to your business. And then they come in, and do an attestation, looking over your records and making sure they're compliant. So you need somebody who isn't overseeing those to be able to attest to them.
And so a lot of people, and I know you're specifically in Michigan, so let's just talk about the Michigan rules, and each state's different. But it's similar, if you're listening, similar to a lot of contractors. So a lot of contractors need a CPA to come in and kind of put their eyes on your financial statements. And depending on the size in the contractor's view, depending on the size of the entity and that sort of things, it'll dictate how much the CPA has to lean into the financials and how much time they're putting into it and testing that they are accurate. Can you kind of tell us from a 30,000 foot view in the state of Michigan, because there's a lot of regulation in this industry, what are some of the requirements for someone in this industry?
So Michigan operators are required to have an attestation every 3 years. And the state puts a form together with it's a set of agreed upon procedures. So it's procedures that the CPA is performing to look at your records to make sure they're compliant. High level view, you need to make sure that you have all the receipts for your transactions. So it's a rule to have and keep your vendor receipts. So even if it's going out for lunch or the gas station, the rule is to have your receipts. So even those types of transactions can be looked at.
Awesome. And when should someone, if let's say you're in this industry as a retail person, a processor, or a grower, when should they start establishing a relationship with a CPA in building their team out? CPA, bookkeeper. I know you have a great suite of services that you could provide, but not all CPAs necessarily are going to, or enrolled agents for that matter, do the bookkeeping and the payroll. But when should they start looking for that firm or that person to help them out with it?
I would say at the beginning. So I think a lot of clients defer to working with an attorney as their first professional service provider. And they're helping them with lease agreements, operating agreements that have tax matter sections. And a lot of times I see a client won't engage a CPA until long after these types of agreements to get their business started are signed, and they don't realize exactly what those agreements mean from a tax perspective. So, for myself, I tend to answer questions. If somebody called me and said, I'm looking at getting into cannabis, can you talk with me for a few minutes? I usually give some advice. Right. I try to help. So I would say at least try to talk with the CPA in the beginning. Maybe you're not, consulting with them on a formal hourly basis, but at least have that opinion next to your, the agreements and things that you're looking at to get your business started.
And no, that's a great advice. And I think that transcends a lot of different industries. We see sometimes people probably better off looking for professional advice early than too late. And
right.
So if someone is coming, so what are some of the unique tax rules related to the cannabis industry and in some of the recent potential developments going on? And then we'll start talking about some of the other segments, but specifically right now for someone that is operating a cannabis-based industry, what are some of the unique tax rules? And again, is there anything coming down the pipeline potentially to change that?
Sure. So the most unique tax rule is, businesses that are cannabis. Cannabis is a Schedule I controlled substance at the federal level. So they're subject to a tax rule called 280E, which disallows them from taking ordinary necessary business expenses. So if you think about, those types of expenses, marketing, payroll in some cases, you're limited pretty heavily. Now, an operator perspective and from a tax professional perspective, you are allowed to take your cost of goods sold. So to me, that's where the fun part kind of comes in, especially if you are a grower or processor. There's a specific inventory regulation that lists all the costs, that can be included in your inventory. So just spending the time with the client early on to get their accounting chart of accounts set up right, to capture all these costs. You're going on the accrual method of accounting, so this isn't cash based for these operators unless they make a change of accounting method election. So you have some complexities there to make sure you're capturing those costs and then make sure you're writing them off properly as your inventory product is sold. Operators, I would say, especially if you're a grower or processor, make sure your CPA understands those inventory regulations, because there's a lot of opportunity for capturing costs. And if the CPA isn't familiar with that, they're likely to miss things, for you.
No, absolutely. So for most taxpayers, that cost of goods sold is, for a lot of people with inventory, that's one of their largest deductions, maybe their largest deduction. And then, however, they're able to deduct all other ordinary necessary business expenses. For someone in this industry right now, they can only deduct the cost of goods sold. But like Kareyna said, we're working with the right CPA firm, or right tax professional that really understands the rules. They're going to be able to potentially capture other deductions that could be considered cost of goods sold, and offset your taxable income. Because when you're paying tax on your income minus cost of goods sold and not your other expenses, it gets really, really expensive. So, and that is based on the Department of Justice, how they classify cannabis at this point, I believe. But there is potential of a reclassification. I know we're at the time of this recording, that those proceedings were kicked down the road a little bit. But if it's is it a Schedule 1 and they're thinking about moving it to a Schedule 3, or am I trusting my memory too much?
That's correct. The Department of Human Health Services recommended moving cannabis to Schedule 3. Now, then this was back springtime of last year. So they went through a comment period session over this. They had a hearing on December 2nd, so a little over a month ago at the time of this recording. But they didn't have expert witness testimony there, so they couldn't complete the hearing procedures and then pushed it off. So there is potential, if it was rescheduled to Schedule 3, you have where 280E only applies to Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. But then you get into, Schedule 3, and if my memory is serving me right, that's the same schedule as, codeine and other types of pharmaceuticals like that. And there's no adult use, recreational use for pharmaceutical.
Right.
So there's still some regulatory, issues they're going to have to work out if they do push it to Schedule 3.
Well, Kareyna, they should have gotten your number for expert testimony. So shame on them for not using the resources Teaching Tax Flow has. That's what I have to say.
Right.
Go.
So, Kareyna, a couple of questions for you too. So, I'm going to make the assumption that majority of our audience that's listening to this probably isn't in the industry. Again, depending on their geographic location, they're probably surrounded by the industry one way, shape, or form. And then, obviously there's a lot of interest that goes around this. So I don't know the best way to really ask it as far as for how do we make a comparison to say somebody wanted to open a business, and I'll kind of let you decide whether it's a grower or a provisioning center or retail versus, the similar process. Say you wanted to start a landscaping company or something, just so we can really lay it out for our audience where some of those kind of paths veer in different directions, if that's okay.
Sure. So to operate a cannabis business in any state, the state itself will have its own regulations. So you have to have a license through the state. Getting that license, your facility has to be compliant. So there's rules, for building out your facility, whether you're a grower or a retailer. there's municipal regulations. So here in Michigan, for example, we have municipalities who opt in or opt out, and then they have their own set of rules. So you have to be familiar with the state and with the local rules of where you're operating. It's not something you can just say, I'm going to start one day. It does require, pretty intensive capital in most cases to get started, especially on the grow and the processing side. They have a lot of equipment and build outs. A lot of what I've seen is, where the municipalities regulate these businesses, they're often in industrial areas. So if you've got a building that is an old industrial facility, there's usually substantial improvements that need to be made to that building just to get it up to compliant specifications. You have to be careful for contaminants, mold, pests, all these things that you don't really think about as much or even have to think about for a traditional business that you do have to take into consideration for cannabis.
And you mentioned, so let's pivot now, because you did mention facility, which is a great segue to this. Although I do have one question, so I'm not pivoting yet, I guess. Interesting. Now, when you mention accrual based, does that the inventory has to be accrual based, or does the entire entity have to be taxed as accrual base?
Inventory has to be accrual based, so you
So I thought-
capitalizing costs.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. And are anyone in the cannabis industry eligible for, I know they can't get a lot of deductions, are any of them eligible for any tax credits? Or would probably not, I'm assuming.
Well, that's actually a great question. I know a number of cannabis companies who did receive the employee retention credit because that was based off of payroll taxes.
Right.
Now, you had different opinions. Could that have been disallowed? Could that have be one of these that the IRS is scrutinizing hard? So you really have to weigh what the risks are in that. But otherwise, if it's income tax related, no, they're not allowed credits or deductions because of 280E.
I was thinking about like research and development credit. That's the only one I was thinking of. But so hopefully for those taxpayers and for their sake that this can get rescheduled to get in. We'll see what happens. And so segueing into, let's say somebody owns a warehouse, right? And they get approached by someone in the cannabis industry and they say, hey, I'd like to rent this warehouse out. Obviously, we know with the cannabis industry, there are some challenges with payment processing, with banking. I think we've come a long way with some credit unions and some outfits being open to doing business. But for someone that's doing business with someone in the cannabis industry, like a landlord or maybe a waste management company, right? Or some just a normal vendors that we all use operating in office. Are there any considerations that those people might have they could think of? Or
there is, the banks want to know that what they tend to call you a tier 2 or a tier 3. So tier 1 is a cannabis operator directly. Tier 2 would be somebody like me who's getting payments. Tier 3 is who I'm paying. And that depends on the bank and their risk structure. There, at least in Michigan and I know other states, that there are a number of banks and credit unions especially who are open to working with the industry. The cost is more. So an operator, I've seen fees range, close to $3,000 just to go through the application process to open an account. And then they're charged, $250 to $1,000 per month. As a tier 2, when I first got in here, my charge was $50 per month. I was able to find a bank that didn't charge for tier 2 other than just their normal fees. So you do have to do your research and, find the right banking partner.
Right. So if you're someone that is a vendor, a common vendor of a cannabis industry, that's something that you need to consider as well. So,
Chris, that's actually a really good question. I've never thought about that. Even like it's, yeah. So yeah, it would make sense. And I guess you have to disclose that, right? And then Kareyna, have you ever seen it where, I don't know if this really would have trickled to you or not, I'm sure, but I'm also sure like your relationship with your clients, right? You're a very, very, very trusted asset to their success, right? Like I'm sure you walk into some of their facilities and they got, cookies and charcuterie boards, spreads for you, keeping you happy, some warm fuzzy slippers and a blanket. But have you ever seen it where, say your client is a tier one, and then all of a sudden a lot of tier two issues pop up where I don't know if, are those tier, I love that they're tier ones and tier twos. So it reminds me of automotive a little bit, but like what happens at that point? I mean, is there an audit process that sometimes takes place? And, how does that look? Are the outcomes usually never in the favor of the businesses tier one or two? And the reason why I ask that is sometimes I'm sure if it goes down all the way to tier three, some of these vendors might not even know that they're directly working in the industry. They might just look at it as, because there's so many names, right? For companies now, you might not know what industry they are. Like Chris, you mentioned if you're picking up, trash like waste management, do you really know what industry it is? Maybe not, right? Like what has been your experience with that?
I will clarify the tier three. I think it does depend on how much of your mix is from the industry, how much of your business. Tier three in my mind too is also, so if you have, let's say, an investment company at the top, and then you've got the real estate company and the equipment rental company, and then the real estate and the equipment company are renting to the cannabis operator. So money, tier one, cannabis operator up to the rental company, which is tier two, and then tier three up to the investor company.
Gotcha.
I was thinking that too. So that's common, where you have an investor or holding company they're there because they're there to fund the business and, its ancillary operations.
Mhm.
That makes sense.
Yeah. As far as what happens, if the bank isn't aware, years ago when I first got into this, I worked with my normal bank and didn't think anything of it. And they found out I was receiving payments from cannabis companies and they closed my accounts. So you do want to make sure the bank is aware of what you're doing and has that structure.
Well, that's a great example. I mean, it's not like you're trying to be malicious or anything. We don't, we ran into that with, we used to have a niche in helping foreign nationals or non-US residents with tax compliance. And we had a bank not like that, not one, because, we were wiring, receiving payments from certain countries that they didn't like, and that can happen. So I want to wrap up is just thinking about, because there's the bigger scope of this, like think about like payroll, for instance. Do most of the cannabis industry companies, are they able now to do some type of electric payroll processing? Because I think about all the people that even work in a cannabis industry, or do they get a normal W-2 and can in their tax reporting and that sort of stuff? So
Yep, they do. There are a number of payroll companies that support the industry now. Gusto, however you say that, they're active in the industry. That's a pretty common one that's out there. There's several who provide. What they do though is they'll put you on the highest tier because of their compliance costs. So there is more cost to it. Where an issue is like 401k plans for your employees. I don't see any of those. I mean, that's kind of a different animal. Healthcare, they are able to get healthcare and benefits like that, but it's more the investment side that is not friendly to the industry at all.
wow. Yeah, I mean, I think I can see that, and but think about where it's come. I mean, and you said how far it's come in the last 5 years, right? As far as the challenges you had 5 years ago, I'm sure there are challenges now, but hopefully they're different challenges. They're a little easier to jump those hurdles and become more mainstream. So, anything
Days
finally?
have changed from bags of bills and back alleys,
Yeah.
right?
So I know we talked a little bit about Michigan, but what's your best advice for someone that doesn't live in Michigan? They're listening in another state. How could they find someone to help them out on the tax side of things, and or just learn about the rules specifically for that state?
Sure. So I would first start with researching the state's website, or they should have a page with information. Michigan, there's a wealth of information out there. They do educational sessions on a regular basis, so webinars where they're teaching about different topics related to licensing. So that's the first place to start, is with the state's website. Second place, I would see if your state CPA association has any resources. So like here in Michigan, we have a cannabis resource group. We have a site with some basic information about understanding the tax rules, understanding some of the different nuances in the industry. And it's designed to give enough information where you know what steps to take to research further. Third tip, if you're brand new, look on social media for different groups. So, again, Michigan, we have an active cannabis professionals group with, I think close to 10,000 members in it, and people from other states as well. So if you can find, resources like that and throw your questions out, ask for a recommendation for a tax professional who can help, and you're going to get that feedback and information back.
Awesome. And Kareyna, we'll drop your contact as well in the show notes and whatnot, where anybody's listening to this too. So if anybody has direct questions, they can always reach out to you. And unless they're so busy helping everybody out there that you'll have to send them somewhere. But I know we met you at a conference, Chris and myself, I believe it was last year. Well, really wasn't that long ago, if we say last year, 24, but a while back. And I mean, honestly, I was just blown away with your knowledge in that industry. And it seems like a lot of tax professionals just, I wouldn't say shy away from it, but it's just not their comfort zone. It's a non-traditional industry. And I mean, I appreciated the presentation that you had and just walking through it and the way that you explain things to people, their questions. I think somebody had in there, you did a really good job. So basically what I'm going around in circles of saying is it's always nice talking to you about this and hearing kind of your take on it. And you've been doing it for a while too. It's not like you just woke up last Tuesday and thought the industry would be fun, right? Seems like it's your niche and passion. So we appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do love to talk about it. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Well, Chris, I don't know if you have any other questions. If not, maybe we'll let Kareyna get back to work, because I'm sure she's slammed as well.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate her time. Again, she's an amazing resource. If you have any questions, please reach out to her. Or reach out to us. We'll guide you in the right direction. Thank you so much. And as always, I learn a lot of stuff. So I like that.
Yeah.
That's good.
And that's saying a lot, because Chris knows a lot. So it's
Oh my goodness.
I'll put about a little bit of a pedestal. But yeah, Kareyna, thank you for joining us. Chris, thanks for joining your own show again, as always. And we'll see everybody back here again next week on the podcast. Different topic, somewhat different day, somewhat different time. So we'll see everybody very soon.
The content provided is for educational purposes only. We encourage you to seek personalized investment advice from your financial professional. For all tax and legal advice, please consult your CPA or attorney. Investment advisory services are offered through Cabin Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cabin Securities, a registered broker-dealer. The content of this podcast does not constitute an offer of securities. Offerings can only be made through an offering memorandum, and you should carefully examine the risk factors and other information contained in the memorandum.